Greetings great guys, and welcome back to What If Goku Was an Avatar. This is part 7, and also the start of book 2, Earth. Sorry for the long wait, but I've had so much to do these last few months. It's been finishing off my studies, the internship, getting a job, fighting off a cold. Yes, I know, I'm full of excuses, but they're true. Anyway, here it is, part 7. But before we continue, let's just do a quick recap of what happened in the last part. Right, so the siege of the Northern Water Tribe was taking place and the battle was fierce. Sokka, with his little brother, who happened to be very big at the time, were in the heart of the fight. Tokyo had of course transformed due to the full moon, and was smashing things up pretty badly, causing damage to both sides. But thanks to the Fire Nation soldiers actively shooting flames towards the gorilla, Tokyo's primal smashing instincts were mostly focused on them and not the waterbenders. And so he didn't end up pulling a Gramp Stomp, if you will. A Gramp Stomp is stomping on one's grandpa. Anyway, he lost to form when Zhao killed the moon spirit by the pond, and Sokka had to pick him up and retreat. They then bumped into Aang and Katara, who were able to escape from Zhao and his men. But of course, they all returned to the pond a bit later with the princess, where they all talked about what had happened. Aang ended up going into the water and fusing with the ocean spirits, much like in the original, while Tokyo ran after him to help. Well, once he had woken up, that is. Once they had left the spirit oasis and the princess had given back her life to the moon spirit, Tokyo became an Ozaru once more. At this point, the Fire Nation had pretty much been defeated and were being sent on their merry way. After that, Fish Aang, as I decided to call them, the merged version of Aang and the Ocean Spirit, made their way over to Tokyo. They didn't fight him, but instead calmed him down and brought out his consciousness. Finally, peace was restored at the Northern Water Tribe. Now that we're all caught up, let's move on with part 7. The gang were packing up, getting ready to depart for the Earth Kingdom base. The general and his men were supposed to escort Team Avatar to Omashu, if I'm not mistaken, but as we all know, he got a little bit carried away. In my what if, things went down pretty similarly, at least for the first half of the episode, but then took a turn. There was no Avatar state involved, with Katara being taken hostage and earthbended into the ground. Why is that? Well, because of Tokyo, of course. He understood all too well what it was like to be a raging, powerful entity who destroyed everything in its path. So when Aang came clean to the general about his decision not to force the Avatar state, Tokyo was there with him to back him up. Sure, General Fong still tried to attack Aang, who was able to dodge every single attack, but not go on the offensive, but Tokyo wasn't as passive and would not let this sort of behaviour slide. He'd probably say something along the lines of, "Hey, that wasn't very nice! You can't just force people to do things they don't wanna!" After Aang, or should I say Fish Aang, helped him get in touch with his consciousness while being in his great ape form, he had gained all the memories from his previous transformations. He now knew firsthand what damage such powers could do when not in control, and if Aang didn't feel like he had mastered this Avatar state, and did not want to take such a forceful approach, then this general was not going to force him into it. Tokyo would make sure of that. In a matter of seconds, the general was knocked out. Remember, Tokyo got worn out at the North Pole, and probably received a little Senkai boost, so if he was at a power level of, I don't know, say 80 to 100, well, it would take very little to knock a fairly normal human out. I mean, sure, he was an earthbender, but that's not going to help him withstand a Tokyo punch to the face. I mean, even Sokka knocked him out in the original by whacking him on the head with a bone weapon of some sort. So yeah, Tokyo knocked him out easily. After the knockout, the gang then continued to Omashu to meet up with King Bumi again. Before we continue this story, I will say some of the less important episodes, and especially the filler ones, not that there are many, but there are a few, will be skipped or skimmed through rather quickly, as I realised that putting too much detail there would make this story very, very long, and those episodes aren't even that relevant to the story, so just thought I'd mention that. In order to reach Omashu, the gang had to travel through the cave of two lovers, so yep, they still met those musical nomads. Back at the North Pole, my what if and the original's timelines had sort of merged and were the same again, so that's why the gang still ended up meeting the musicians, if you want to call them that, here as well. One big difference here though is that when they entered the cave and got trapped in because of the Fire Nation soldiers, they exited the cave way sooner. While everyone was half panicking, Tokyo simply raised two arms and got blasting away. He didn't use like an explosive ki attack, that might have caused the cave to crumble onto them, but rather a thick laser beam to clear a small path out. Remember, this version of Goku or Kakarot is a slightly weaker, but way, and I mean way more experienced ki user. He learnt to shape and use his energy almost as if it were bending. As a result of this, the gang, and also the musical nomads, were able to simply walk back out. Well, led by a confident Toku. He didn't take too kindly to those Fire Nation soldiers trapping them in. He's not one to flee to begin with, he only kind of did it to follow the gang. And also, he likes to fight, so now that they started it, and tried to get away, he was prepared to battle. Once they had exited the cave though, the soldiers were already gone.
Ah, too bad.
With the soldiers gone, and everybody a bit shaken from the cave-in, especially Appa, they decided that perhaps flying over the cave would be the best alternative after all. They would just have to fly a little bit higher this time in order not to get smashed with burning rocks in mid-air because of the blockade. Give it a little longer, and alas, welcome to Omashu. Or as Sokka said, I give you... Oh no. Oh no indeed, Sokka. Toku saw the overtaken city, and immediately wanted to fix things, using his fists. In other words, he wanted to pull a Red Ribbon Army, if you will. He knew that he had the power to take down all of the soldiers and free Omashu, but the rest of the group stopped him. They reminded him about the civilians and how a big battle or civil war, well, kind of, the Fire Nation isn't part of the city, so maybe it wouldn't be a civilian war, but anyway, they got it through his head that the city would need saving in a more careful way. Think about the people and all that stuff. Sokka and Katara were actually quite okay with not going in at all, but that's where Aang stepped in, telling them that this was more than finding an earthbending teacher. It was about finding his friend. So, some things went down very similarly, you know, with the pentapus or the sewer octopus creatures and the fake disease, and having the citizens basically just walk straight out the city. But the battle between Azula and her sidekicks versus the gang went down quite differently thanks to Toku being there. That's right, we'll get the satisfaction of seeing Azula struggle way sooner in my What If than in the original. I mean, I know it's part of her character, but it always bothered me that she succeeded and always got her way in the beginning of the show. Well, actually most of the show. But don't worry, I'm not going to have her pride and very sense of self completely shattered and face deformed or anything like that. But for sure, she'll find out that she's just a person after all, with flaws, limits, and weaknesses. Azula, Mei, and Ty Lee are very skilled fighters, or whatever you want to call them, warriors/acrobats, and they would have put up a good fight against most people, but we have to remember how ridiculously fast Goku, Krillin, Master Roshi, and the rest of the Z Warriors were in Dragon Ball, although they weren't called Z Warriors in Dragon Ball, but never mind. They were very, very powerful and fast. There was literally a scene from early Dragon Ball of Krillin's and Master Roshi's fights from the World Tournaments, where they stopped to explain in slow motion to the audience exactly what had transpired, as no one but the fighters could keep up. What am I getting at with this? Well, basically that Toku would have perceived Azula and her gang as sloths moving at 10% speed. While Sokka and Katara were busy getting away, and Aang was trying to get to Bumi, Toku was busy taking on Mei, and later Azula and Ty Lee as well. Every knife thrown, every attack made its way, was dodged with ease. This is something Mei had never experienced before, and the best shot anyone got at him all day was when Ty Lee punched Toku's foot from underneath the floor, much like how she executed that sneak attack in the original. But all this did was make Toku trip a little bit. It did give some form of numbing or tickling feeling in his foot, and it was the most effective strike so far, but not much more than that. He then got up without being paralysed, as if nothing had even happened, broke up the floor, and quickly blasted Ty Lee with a little key blast. This made Mei freeze on the spot in slight horror. She didn't show emotions that often, but then again, it's not every day that you see your best friend, who also happens to be a very capable athlete and fighter, get blasted away off of the building somewhere with ease. Where did she go? Would she be alright? Had she even survived? Mei quickly ran after, well, where she thought Ty Lee had gone, and Toku just stood there in surprise and mumbled to himself,
Wow, gosh, I'd have known how weak she was. I would have gone for something smaller.
He mistook her pressure point acupuncture punch for a normal, relatively hard punch by someone fairly strong, and therefore thought that she could handle such an attack. Whoops, hope she's alright, but he didn't worry too much about that. Remember, Goku as a kid hadn't yet become this merciful anti-killing guy. In fact, he took down quite a few baddies in early Dragon Ball without any signs of remorse whatsoever. So instead of brooding about it, he decided to help Aang with Bumi. Where are they? Ah, there, right. Riding the post system with a crazy blue fire girl chasing them. That's Azula. Quickly, Toku made his way up to them, but decided to practice some more restraint this time, not wanting to hurt anyone really. Although he didn't know the exact science behind the Zenkai boost at this point, he was still aware that he had gotten quite a bit stronger since the North Pole. So instead of blasting the princess to a crisp, he ran up to her from behind, and yes, he ran down the slide as he could run down the slide faster than she could slide down it, and simply kicked her off. Azula got slammed into the wall, but of course, Azula being perfect Azula would sort of catch herself using her firebending, and then try to chase after Tokyo, kicking a powerful blue flame their way. But Aang stopped the flame with an air blast, and then Tokyo finished the job by hitting Azula with one of his keychains or key ropes. Azula was hit with the technique in mid-air and fell straight down with her arms and legs all tied up, looking a bit like one of those bad guys from cartoons with 5 tyres all around them, you know, Michelin Man style. Now, thanks to the key wrapped around her, she did not die or break all of her bones when she hit the ground. Also, she used her firebending with her mouth to try and dampen the fall, though it wasn't nearly as effective as if she would have done it like rocket style with her feet. But at least she did enough to ensure that she only sustained some mild fractures or sprains. Tokyo and Aang then got to the end of the slide and had that conversation with Bumi, where he explained that he couldn't be Aang's teacher, and that he needed to find someone who waited and listened, someone who had mastered neutral Jing. Sure, Bumi knew about and practiced this neutral Jing as well, but he must have either felt that he hadn't mastered it, or that his responsibility was to take back his Earth Kingdom, because either way, he chose to not train Aang in the original, so I'm going to say that he'll do the same thing here. So, just like in the original, Bumi snorted his classical snort and proceeded to earthbend himself up the slide again. Once the gang had all gathered together again, they headed off into the sky once more and continued their search for an earthbending teacher. And yes, for any of you wondering, Azula is still on the ground, tied up, and will be for quite some time, until Tokyo gets far enough away, relaxes enough, or simply chooses to release his key. And I'm sure the key can probably just vanish by itself after some time, but she's going to lay there for a while. Oh, and May was able to find Ty Lee. She'd actually been knocked out, but she was still alive. Thanks to having been flung into scaffoldings made by flimsy wood, her fall, much like Azula's, had been somewhat dampened. Had she not have been blasted away with one of Tokyo's smaller energy beams, she would have remained conscious and uninjured, and therefore been able to do the acrobatics she normally does, grab hold of a scaffolding or something and land. But of course, with the force of Tokyo's beam, she wasn't so lucky. A few broken bones and a concussion, I'm sure, but hey, at least she's alive. And that's quite a feat, having gone up against Tokyo. Anyway, next up is the Swamp episode, which is one that we will tackle because it's quite an important episode. It's some foreshadowing for Toph, and it also shows Sokka and Katara's longing and love for deceased people they once knew. Also, this time, Tokyo is going to be with them. Now, if you guys remember, Aang felt the swamp calling him, and the rest got a bit spooked, of course, so he decided not to land. The swamp didn't take too kindly to this rejection, and sent them a tornado, forcing them to crash land. True, Tokyo was with them this time around, but I don't see how he could have gotten them out of that situation. He was strong, for sure, and would have been able to resist the tornado and its power, if he would have had an immovable object to grab hold of, but he didn't know how to fly yet, and didn't have anything to hold on to except for the rest of the gang plus Appa and Momo, so understandably they all went down. Once they landed, they realised that they had been separated from Appa and Momo, but at least they had each other, and much like in canon, when night fell, the vines came out to play. Sokka, Katara and Aang were quickly dragged away. Tokyo was the only one with the strength to rip the vines off with his bare hands. Oh, and Sokka made it out, of course, because of his machete, but it took some time. But it didn't matter that Tokyo had freed himself and hadn't moved, since the rest had moved and been dragged away in different directions. So, all the same, they were all alone, and the weird visions would start to present themselves. Katara would still see her mum, and of course, Aang would still see this random laughing girl who we all know as Toph. But Sokka's vision would change and not be Princess Yue. He never got that close to her, and certainly never dated her, so he wouldn't feel much guilt, at least not in the same way, when she died, or gave up her life. Remember, here he's kind of together with Suki, but he wouldn't see her either. She was still alive, and doing just fine, at least the last time he checked. Instead, I believe he'd see his dad. More specifically, his dad walking away from him, setting out for war, and leaving him behind. A painful memory indeed, and one he found himself thinking about a lot. The pain of missing him and not being allowed to join, as well as the responsibilities his father had left him with, would probably be enough to make his dad be his vision. Anyway, now for Tokyo. I did consider either Hakoda or Kaya, but Tokyo never got all the responsibilities that Sokka did, nor was he really Mummy's little boy as much as Katara was Mummy's little girl. So I think he'd see someone completely different, someone he hadn't previously been able to remember. but someone that had been deep, deep down in his subconscious all along. Yes, you probably guessed it. His original parents, Gine and Bardock. As Toku stood there in the misty dark with the green water up to his knees, he couldn't quite put his finger on what he was seeing, or who. Two people with tails who sort of looked familiar, yet he was quite sure he had never seen them before. The vision didn't last very long though, and the only thing the ghost-looking strangers said was, "Survive," and "Don't forget us." As they started to fade away, Toku tried to run after them, but just as he jumped and grabbed a hold of the taller one's shoulder to turn it around, he realised that it was his brother, Sokka, and they both fell over into the water and off of a little hill as Sokka was standing quite close to the edge and Toku had just jumped towards him quite fast. This snapped Sokka out of his vision and back into reality, and when they got up, they realised that Katara and Aang were there too. Somehow, the visions had all brought them together again, but they didn't have much time to think about it, as very shortly after, they got attacked by a big, wet vine monster. I think things would go fairly similar here, except they'd beat the vine bender, aka Hugh, a lot quicker. Toku didn't strike at first, he simply took a step back and observed. This man, or monster, or whatever he was interesting. Toku, much like his original counterparts, has the unique ability where he can basically see an attack once and mimic it perfectly, or well, fairly well. But instead of it being the Kamehameha wave this time, he was studying Hugh, bending the vines, although we of course know he was bending the water within the vines. After a few more seconds of watching, Toku joined the battle. Hugh was good, but nothing could have prepared him against this. Toku was utilising his ki control to make long arms. It was almost a mixture of Katara's water arms, her octopus form, and also Hugh's vine bending. Hugh, of course, tried to counter this weird glowing yellow stuff that this boy was bending, but it would not budge or break. What was it made of? So anyway, much like in canon, Hugh was sort of defeated-ish, and then the battle ceased. Then they went on to talk about the visions and how everything in the swamp was connected. Katara and Sokka's visions weren't really looked into that much, as it made sense. They missed those particular people, and so they saw those people. After the chat, Aang understood that the girl in his vision was someone he was going to meet in the future, while Toku's was of his past. Only he'd grown up in the Southern Water Tribe. This didn't make any sense. Unless, of course.
It must have been before you guys found me. They were my original parents.
Sokka then jumped in and stated that that made sense, except for the part about the tails. He had gotten used to the fact that his brother had a tail, and it sort of made sense for his parents to then also have tails, but he had never ever seen tails of anyone else. He would require some detective gear to figure this one out. Perhaps a trip to that island. But the two brothers didn't have time to discuss the subject any further, because Aang had just finished his conversation with Hugh and located Appa and Momo through the swamp's interconnected roots. They were in trouble, and the gang would need to hurry if they didn't want their animal friends to become swamp bender food. I won't go on to tell the rest of this day, because it would basically go down the same way things did in canon, only a bit easier thanks to Toku. I could add that Toku would impress the swamp benders at the campfire by eating so much. I mean, heck, he could give Appa a good run for his money, but other than that, there's really nothing worth mentioning. So, we continue off in mid-air, flying on Appa, and Toku was lost in thought, thinking about his vision. I mean, it's not like there was much else to do up there in the sky, other than perhaps sleep or talk to the same three people. What did it all mean? If he had parents who clearly seemed to love him, what happened? It's not like he was sad or anything, he was just curious. Katara noticed him dreaming away and guessed what was on his mind. You mentioned that man, your dad, or biological dad, he told you to survive. Maybe you were from the Fire Nation and there were soldiers who chose to leave the army, and because of their treachery, they had to leave you. Aang joined in the conversation, but only got as far as, "The monks always told me that," before Sokka interrupted.
I don't think so.
They all looked at him with curiosity. He continued,
Think about it. If they were soldiers who decided to leave the army, clearly they were sort of good people, right? I just can't see two people with morals like that leaving their baby behind, even during war.
But then he stopped and thought about his own vision for a second and saw his own dad walking off.
I don't know. It's possible,
he muttered and looked away. A few hours later, the team found themselves wandering around a little town in the Earth Kingdom. They had decided to put all the visions on hold for now and help Aang look for an earthbending teacher. Unfortunately, they weren't really having much luck. Well, until they overheard those two teenage boys talking about Earth Rumble 6. You know, the tournament for earthbenders. They of course pulled the good old, "The island of Narnia. Narnia business," which of course left the team rather speechless. And no, Toku didn't go up and give them a good spank. he, much like OG Goku, could sometimes be a bit clueless. Sure, he was not as thick as Goku was, but he still had a tendency to overlook when he was being mocked.
Gosh, that's a weird name for an island.
Sokka looked at his brother with pity. Bless you. But luckily, Katara was there to save the day and teach those guys not to mess with the Water Tribe. So again, a few hours later, the four of them found themselves in a new location. This time, it was on the front row seats in a large arena. If they wanted to find an earthbender, they couldn't look in the skies. They would have to look underground. What better place to look for an earthbending teacher than at a tournament for the pros? The only person more hyped than Sokka was Toku. All the fighting, the whole concept of a tournament. Oh, this sure had gotten his Saiyan blood pumping. But nope, he would have to contain himself. He wanted to go up and fight Toph once Xing Fu announced that anyone at all could go up and face her and even win some money, though he didn't really care about the money part. But Katara stopped him. You see, Aang had stood up at the same time and explained to them that he wanted to talk to Toph. This was a bummer to Toku, of course, but he understood. She did seem like the right kind of earthbending teacher. After all, she waited, she listened, and of course Toku noticed this. Remember, they were all moving quite slow to him, so nothing went unseen. Aang then went up into the main arena and had his little chat with Toph, who then got blown off, and then she proceeded to storm off in a sulk. Yeah, she didn't take too well to defeat.
Anyway, once they had located her family house and been invited for dinner, things almost went like you'd expect.
Aang and Toph would go out alone to talk, while Toku would stay inside, as there would be plenty of real food to eat. Luxurious food from a rich family. Oh, how he had longed for a proper meal. Don't get me wrong, he was used to roughing it up, as he had done a lot of travelling and that's how they ate most of the times, but having now a seemingly infinite amount of high quality food, oh, he was not going to let this perfect opportunity get away from him. So he basically cleaned out the whole kitchen. I'm actually not sure what Sokka and Katara were doing at this very time, and I don't think we ever got to see it in the original, but let's just say that they were playing an exciting game of thumb wars or something. Toph would of course notice them getting ambushed, but before they could even get away, two great metal containers would capture both of them. Of course, Sokka, Katara and Toph's father, as well as the earthbending teacher, for lack of a better word, would show up at the arena to pay the kidnap bail. But wait, we're forgetting someone, and his name is Toku. As Master Yu, that's Toph's teacher, for lack of a better word again, sent the bag of gold Xing Fu's way, a rattling coin sound could be heard. What was that? Oh, it was the sound of the bag of gold coming to a halt against Toku's foot. He had seemingly appeared out of thin air between the group and the kidnappers.
Sorry guys, but it just doesn't feel like a fair trade.
Then he looked towards Xing Fu and the boulder with a serious expression.
First you take our friends, then you want our money? Not as long as I'm here.
This would of course cause the two dunderheads to burst out laughing.
The boulder suspects this monkey boy is way out of his league.
But Toku just gave them his confident but serious smirk.
We'll see.
And before they could even take a stance, Toku had speed jumped up towards the boxes and with his bare hands yanked them off of their chains and landed on the ground carrying both of the boxes. Yes, it made for quite the impact, but hey, we've seen Avatar characters survive this sort of stuff before, so let's just roll with it. Also, Toph and Aang got a bit of extra cushioning as Toku made sure the bottom of each box smacked the two earthbenders on the heads. They survived, somehow, but got knocked out. He then broke open the metal crates using his key control like a staff or blade of some sort. He was about to blast them open with a key blast, but remembered how that went last time with Tai Li. Yeah, best take things a bit easier this time, especially since he actually cared for the people inside the crates. The two of them got out and Toph ran over to her dad to play the helpless little girl act. That's right, she kept on playing that weird act because Sokka and Katara never had to beg Toph for help, which caused her dad to never say she was helpless, blind, and fragile. Toph never felt the need to come clean or save the day, and therefore continued playing the helpless little girl role. But don't worry, she's not going to be out of the picture just yet. After all, the gang was still in Mr. Beifong's good graces, and after that outstanding rescue by Toku, they'd all be welcomed back to their house as honourable guests. But what happens after this will be revealed in the next part. Thanks for watching.